Welcome in, NFL fans, to another episode of Necessary Roughness. I'm your host, John Boyd, joined again this week back from a big cruise by Nick Winograd. And we've also got Kev on with us again, as I'm sure you remember, this is our first broadcast now on Bite Size Sports Network. So we're stoked to be part of this. Oh,
Welcome. We're super glad to have you.
This is exciting.
I'm excited. It's nice to have some folks here chatting with me. The gang at home, they're used to Sean and Nate, but we'll get used to hanging out here with John and Nick. I won't be here all the time. I promise. I'm gonna let them do their thing. But also, James will be coming with me on Thursdays with the Bounce and Trevor. And I believe Dan, we'll have a lot of shows coming out for you soon. So be on the lookout this weekend for more of an update. But I'm going to sit back. I'm just part of the panel today. So thank you for having me, fellas. I appreciate it.
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
of course, man. Of course, love another voice in the room. So we're going to talk today about the South divisions, both NFC and AFC. We'll start with the NFC, and we're going to zoom out a little bit. We'll talk favorite free agent signings, and we'll get to some way too early division predictions. We'll talk about some potential draft fits and stuff like that. And we'll move on to a couple more divisions next week, and so on and so forth. So holler at us in the comments at any time, and let us know what you agree with, disagree with, and we'll keep it fluid. But I'm going to start with the NFC South here, and Nick, we'll start with you. So all across this division, what was your favorite free agent signing for any of these four teams?
All right. Well, it's good to be back here. I would definitely say that the easy choice, which I'm going with, is Derek Carr, just because it's a really important thing for them to get him, because I thought that he was for sure landing in either New York with the Jets or somewhere else where he might have had a tougher time. But I think that, with Dennis Allen, and they just have a really good core overall. They just haven't had the right quarterback since Drew Brees retired. I think that Derek Carr adds a lot of, just veteran experience and leadership that they've needed since Drew Brees retired. I think that they haven't had that with Winston. They've had some good players around him, like Alvin Kamara, and we've talked about Michael Thomas and stuff like that, obviously. And Chris Olave is just a stud, and he's going to be, and I'm sure he's so happy to have Derek Carr. So yeah, I just think that that also going from an inside place to an inside place, a dome to a dome. I think he doesn't have much to adjust to. I think that he can kind of just go into his new role, and I think they're welcoming him with open arms over there, because they really have a chance to win this division now since it's so wide open.
Yeah, and that's going to be our main talking point in this division is who's the favorite. I mean, it is really wide open, and Derek Carr could be a real needle mover at the quarterback position, especially depending on what Carolina does with number one, which we'll get to. But I like Derek Carr as well. I think he raises your floor in New Orleans, kind of like you were mentioning. Didn't really quite get that with Winston. They got some solid play from Andy Dalton. But, I think that's a pretty clear upgrade in the eyes of a lot of folks. So I like that one. I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball with mine. And I like Jesse Bates coming over to Atlanta. 4 years, $64 million. And he is going to be such an important piece of that defense. They also added David Onyemata up front and a couple other minor moves, and we'll see where they go in the draft. But he's just going to allow them to do so many things on the back end, likely starting alongside a guy like Richie Grant and one of my favorite cornerbacks in football, and A.J. Terrell, who may have taken a step back in 2022 from his 2021 performance, which was lights out. But in 2022, Atlanta ran cover 3 at a 40% clip. And they were very much middle field closed. And Jesse Bates is going to be a great guy to slot in back there as that center fielder, and maybe even allow them to play a little bit more cover one on the back end, and let Terrell and those guys up front really get into some receivers' chest pads. So I like what he's going to be able to provide them from a versatility standpoint, and just kind of putting a roof on teams. Again, he's one of the best center fielders in football. So I think that's a great move for them. And, it adds to a secondary that's been hurting for some more talent to go alongside AJ Terrell at cornerback. So that was my pick there. We'll get a little bit more into the weeds with the rest of that team, I'm sure, but that was the first one that came to mind for me. Kev, what do you got as far as NFC South free agent pickups?
You both have good ones, and Bates was especially like that one, John, because that's not the one that I'm going to piggyback off of. So Nick and I have the same one. Derek Carr, I think. Yes, it's maybe the low hanging fruit, the easy answer for us here, but there's a reason it's the most important position on the field, and I am one that believes, and those of you who have watched this program for a while, our Raiders correspondent Sean B would tell you that the Raiders' problems over the last decade have not been on Derek Carr's shoulders, that he has at best had, I think the best defense he played with was 20th in the league at one point.
That's correct.
So if you get this guy with a team that might already be, easy for me to say, the best defense that he's going to play with in a division that's right there, wide open for the taking, I really like what Derek Carr could do in New Orleans. So to me, right now, that's the big needle mover.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can jump right into the Saints. That's a pretty good segue. And we'll talk I'll have their draft capital taken on the bottom as well, but we can talk the roster as it stands a little bit first. You both mentioned the defense that he'll be joining now. Dennis Allen is that defensive mind now at the helm. Did lose Ryan Nielsen, but I think it's still going to be a great unit. They've been retaining their veterans for a long time. Cam Jordan sticking around, Mario Davis sticking around. Marshawn Lattimore has obviously been great. Tyrann Mathieu on the back end, and it's such an aggressive defense as well. I mean, we saw them out of all teams. They give Brady and the Bucks the most fits over the last couple of years, about just about anybody. And they run cover one man at a little bit over a 25% clip. I mean, that's right up there with the Pats. That's right up there with the Steelers. It's right up there with Winks, Giants. So the way they play defensively, they're very versatile, and it's a group that's very familiar with each other. They have a lot of chemistry back there, and pretty easily the best unit I think Derek Carr has been had on the opposite side of the field. So I do think they could make some noise down there, especially if that defense is able to replicate some of the things, some of the high end performances over the last couple of years with a stable presence at quarterback. Michael Thomas might see some grass this year.
Maybe.
And Olave is great. Kamara's back.
Yes.
Jamal Williams, which we haven't mentioned yet, is I don't know if you guys saw his introductory presser for the Saints, but it was gold. He's so funny. But he's going to be great. And this is a good one. There's the emo Andy Dalton, which is funny. He's gotten emo Kirk Cousins before, but neither of those are real digs. Those are solid quarterbacks, and Derek Carr, I think has some room to improve as well. So yeah, that's right. And he's a great fit for them. I think he could be a really good bridge to whatever they look towards in the future. It's a 4-year, $150 million deal with a relatively easy out after year 2 if they choose to do so. But I like that fit, and I like what they've got cooking over there. It's a very winnable division, which we'll talk about with all of these teams. But they're also sitting at pick number 9 in this upcoming draft. So if you had to, and either you could jump in right here, if you had to zero in on a position that you think they'll target at 9, obviously got their quarterback figured out. Where do you think they go in this year's draft with that top pick?
Okay, I'll take this one.
Okay.
So I'm definitely thinking that after they secured, Carr, and they have a pretty formidable defense to start, especially with the defensive mind of Dennis Allen. Um, I would definitely try to target the offensive line just to try to beef up that unit and try to get some more competition there. I think that Derek Carr has gone through so many different coaches, so many different situations, and he's been in the same city the whole time, and it's just so crazy because you got guys like Baker Mayfield who have only been in the league for handful number of years, and he's been through so many quarterback changes quarterback coaching changes, head coaching changes, and he's had to bounce around. Meanwhile, we got a guy like Derek Carr who's been in Las Vegas or Oakland the entire time, and there's been no sense of transparency of what is going on with that. So he's had such a problem there for so long, hasn't worked. He's so talented. I think they need to beef up that O line, try to get him as much help as possible. They already have some good receivers, a star running back, and a good core on defense. So I think the first place they go is try to beef up that O line.
Yeah, and it's an interesting class on the interior of the offensive line. That's probably where they'd go. And this might be, I mean, Trevor Penning is a guy who the jury's probably still out on. But we know he's a mauler and he's a mean, gritty guy at left tackle. But this might be the best offensive tackle duo already that Derek Carr has had in front of him. When you talk about Ryan Ramczyk, and if Penning's able to hit his ceiling, some guys in the mix up front. Andres Pete's aging out. Cesar Ruiz is a little up and down. McCoy's fine. But I think you're right. I think, if you're going to invest that heavily into Derek Carr and, from a schematic standpoint that your defense is the real deal and can perform at a high level and the way he's been able to scheme those guys up, I think that's a prudent place to go, especially if you're thinking you're going to get competent play from Michael Thomas this year. We just saw a big restructure of his deal. He's back on 1 year, $10 million for this season, which is really, really palatable for them. And he's got a few weapons on the outside. It's not his buddy Devontae, but Chris Olave's ceiling is about as high as it gets. And yeah, if he's protected this season, I think they could really make some noise. And a couple other top 100 picks, I think they could go with a linebacker to sort of, follow in the footsteps of a Demario Davis. They're probably going to need another true Mike down the road, and another guy or two at that second level. They did lose Marcus Davenport over the offseason. So I could see them going there depending on the value they like at 9. But yeah, I like going O-line as well. That's somewhere you can't really miss. And we could even see a trade down from them as well if that's where they want to go with their premium assets. Let's jump to the Falcons here. And they're sitting right in front of New Orleans at 8. And this is I talked a little bit about their secondary. I really like the potential of that group with Jesse Bates in the mix, AJ Terrell, of course, and then on the front end we've got David Onyemata into the mix coming over from New Orleans, and Grady Jarrett obviously is one of the most underrated defensive linemen in football, and I'm not sure how it got to that point. He was a big talking point last season on that roughing the passer on Tom Brady. That might have been our first show together, Nick. Might
have been.
Yeah. But he's still a formidable force on the defensive line. And when you look over at the offensive side, it's a weird spot at 8. Right now you've got Desmond Ridder slotted to start at QB, and he's sort of one of those high floor, low ceiling guys, in my opinion. He can scoot a little bit, fastest 40 at the combine of all quarterbacks last season. And he's pretty poised in the pocket, just not a ton of juice outside of that. Not great off script. not necessarily a howitzer attached to his shoulder, but he can get it there.
Yeah.
And but I think the biggest thing for Atlanta this offseason and the main thing they checked off, which is something I felt like they had to do, was re-signing and retaining the right side of that offensive line. This is per PFF. This was the second best run blocking unit in football last season. And they reset the market with Chris Lindstrom at right guard, who was arguably the best guard in football last season, 5 years, $105 million. And they also kept Caleb McGarry at right tackle, who was, one of the more sought after right tackles on the market this offseason. And they actually got him back at a relative bargain, 3 years, 34, if I'm not mistaken. And those guys can really create some space on the right side of that offensive line. And I think that's going to be a huge asset to this offense and something that if they are, I don't want to say stuck, but if they do end up with Ritter at quarterback and they don't get a guy in the draft here, I think they're comfortable leaning into that run game with whomever they have in the backfield. Cordell Patterson still has a little bit of juice. And I think that could, kind of, at least give them a competent offense as a baseline, just with that running game. So that's sort of my spiel on Atlanta. But as far as any other moves they've made or any prospects or positions you feel like they might target in the draft to kind of round this roster out, Kev, where are you at with Atlanta at this stage?
This is an interesting one for me because I think there are a lot of different places Atlanta potentially could go. Now, I'm not sold on where I think they'll go exactly at 8, but as I was looking over the roster as you were breaking it down, I do see, I do see what you're saying. They have a good right side of the O line. What they did acquire. What was it? They traded for Jonnu Smith, right? That was one that has raised some flags for me because they already have Kyle Pitts there, and I know he kind of regressed last year, so I'm wondering if that is simply an insurance/depth move, or are they looking to get more production out of the tight end and they think they're going to have to go elsewhere for it. So that's one that I'm puzzled at a little bit, want to kind of keep an eye out for. But I wonder if they're going to find some more skill players on the outside. I do like Tyler Algier at running back, especially you just mentioned they have a great run on the offensive line. They have great run blocking. So I do think that Patterson has some left in the tank. But is Drake London a true number one to you guys? I find myself thinking Atlanta maybe needs a little help outside with just playmakers on the offensive side of the ball to help Ritter out.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach for them. Arthur Smith was in Tennessee when Jonnu Smith kind of broke out, and so he follows him back over. They also retained Keith Smith, so they're going to roster a fullback more than likely. So we could see some really heavy personnel from Atlanta on the offensive side of the football. I'm not sure I'm there with Drake London as a true number one X receiver, but I think Jonnu will sort of open the door for them to get really creative with Kyle Pitts, and maybe not have him in line as often. I mean, we saw him pretty underutilized last season as the flat read on a lot of flood concepts when Mariota would roll out. Really, just not playing him to his full potential. So I think if you got a more H-back type tight end, move tight end like Jonnu Smith, who can do some more things across the line of scrimmage, you probably feel a little bit more comfortable putting Kyle Pitts out at X and seeing what he can do split out wide and cause some problems for some smaller corners. Maybe play him in some big slot. I know Drake London has been pretty effective in the big slot as well. But I think, if you're going to a 12 personnel, let's say, or a 21 even, with, Algier, Keith Smith, and Jonnu Smith, and then you have Pitts and London out wide. I mean, you've got 2 6'5" guys split out wide, really causing some matchup issues. And you've also got Jonnu Smith over the middle, who isn't quite as tall, but can really cause some problems with his size, I think, as well. So I'm just expecting a very big offense, for lack of a better phrase, and they kept those big guys up front too. So I think it's just going to be a really heavy power gap scheme. Algier was over 1,000 yards last season, and they've got some contested catch threats as well. So I think we could see a lot of Kyle Pitts playing more of like a receiver role. And I don't know how we overlooked Olamide Zaccheaus, man. But Mike's got a couple good comments here. So yeah, he's Jonathan Mingo. He likes as a fit for Atlanta in the draft. And I think we'll get to some draft crushes here a little bit later as well. But yeah, if they're able to figure out how to execute that and put Kyle Pitts in advantageous positions, he should be the number one threat on that offense, right? Yeah. It's just a matter of, hey, can we put him in those spots? Because last year was, fantasy owners will tell you first, and then probably even before the film guys that Kyle Pitts wasn't getting enough targets. But the way he was used was just a little goofy, I think. So we'll see if Arthur figures something out there. Nick, do you have anything to add before we move on to the Panthers here?
The only thing I'll say about the Falcons is I really like this corner, Joey Porter, out of Penn State, just because, obviously you got AJ Terrell on one side, but who you got on this side? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you want to add some pieces for Desmond, but you always want to look defense, and especially when you compare a guy like AJ Terrell, who's a star in this league, with somebody that can really learn from him. I think that could be a really good thing. So I don't think Porter would be a bad pick here at 8 for Atlanta at all. But if they don't go with that, I definitely think that they could potentially move down and try to get more of a skill position, because there aren't that many in their range that are available. So,
yeah, I really like that idea as well. And a guy like Christian Gonzalez, which with as heavy a cover 3 team as Atlanta was last season, if they're anywhere close to that, Gonzalez would be a great fit at 8. Porter would be a great fit alongside AJ Terrell. I think that might be one of the number one needs, now that you mention it, is just taking some of that pressure off of that side of the field. If they're just able to play sides and you don't have AJ Terrell doing any shadowing, you might be able to keep offenses guessing a little bit more often. Pull up this comment here too. Yeah, right. If the offense is competent, we should see a big year for Kyle Pitts, right? So let's jump to Panthers here.
I take it back.
My boy.
My mind.
What's that?
I have a new top signing.
Okay.
And it's Andy Dalton to Carolina.
Nice. Yeah, Andy Dalton now throwing to my guy Adam Thielen, which is a bit of a heartbreaker. That's where Jared Allen went too when he left the Vikes, but that's all right.
That's so weird.
It is. It's nuts. But the team that holds the number one pick is Carolina, and so we'll see if they end up rolling out Andy Dalton. He got a lot of praise from Thielen in his interviews and things like that. But another guy just hopping teams in the division, right? So somebody I liked for Carolina is they move on from DJ Moore, obviously in that blockbuster trade to get up to number one. They bring in Thielen, who will probably get a fair amount of targets as well in that offense. But if I'm not mistaken, if I didn't miss anything, they've still got Deontay Foreman on the roster. Have either of you seen him go anywhere?
I believe Deontay has been signed. Let me check this.
That might be one I missed. I know he wasn't on the last show. I was just kind of scrambling to look that up.
He signed with Chicago.
Chicago. Oh, was it? Who am I thinking of that went to Carolina?
Miles Sanders.
Yes,
Miles Sanders. I almost said Montgomery. Yeah. Miles Sanders comes over. Big year in Philly last year.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that was Miles Sanders or that offensive line. But I think
Still a good player, though.
4 years, 25 for Miles Sanders, something like that, which is sort of a goofy running back contract.
Yeah.
But, this is also a spot that outside of the dearth of weapons, I think this is a pretty solid O-line for a rookie quarterback to join. Austin Corbett, who joined the unit last offseason, really solid right guard. And this is turning into a really solid tackle duo on the offensive line as well, with Ike Ekwonu coming into his own a little bit, and alongside routinely underrated guy in Taylor Moton on the right side of that offensive line. I think it could be a pretty solid group to get a guy. I'm hoping they don't overthink it and just take Stroud or Bryce. There's been some discourse about, I think Thomas Davis, Panthers legend, actually said on talking to Daniel Jeremiah this morning that he thinks they might go Anthony Richardson. He thinks they'll really like what Anthony Richardson's got. But we'll see where they go with that. Mike likes Christian Gonzalez to the Panthers. Jahmyr Gibbs, who has kind of fallen by the wayside as far as a lot of running back discussion goes over the offseason, but coming into it and over the course of the season, he was a pretty clear-cut RB2 behind Bijan, and I think that's a little out of sight, out of mind for some people, but he's going to be the real deal as well. That's a pretty good call there. And I don't know if Miles Sanders really solves anything necessarily on that side of the ball. He was fine last season, but again, I probably could have gotten 70, 80 yards a game behind the Philly O-line, right?
Yeah, pair that with Hurts running. How many of those were on read options where –
And that's right, too.
Is he the lesser of two evils, so to speak, in the defensive's mind?
Yes, exactly. A couple other guys across the front. They did re-sign Bradley Bozeman, who they brought over from Baltimore the past offseason. Hayden Hurst was another signing for them, and they also grabbed the other safety from Cincinnati and Von Bell to shore things up on the back end for them. We'll see what that means for Jeremy Chin. They're both kind of strong safety types. But maybe they get a little weird with Jeremy Chin, and they clung to Brian Burns. They turned down 2 firsts for Brian Burns. So they're banking on a big year from him as well. Do either of you, before we talk a little bit of number 1 pick, do either of you have any other players to shout out on that roster or any other signings that we glossed over?
Yeah, I like Miles Sanders a lot as a player. It's just a little bit, as you said, a goofy contract, just because you don't really want to give running backs 4-year deals, just because, he's certainly had a couple of good years as a Philly Eagle, but obviously last year was the best one, and they had just an exceptional offensive line with the running ability of the quarterback. You don't really have that everywhere you play, so it'll be interesting to see, especially like when the rookie comes in. I'm sure they'll do a lot of good things there because they've made great moves, but it's just a little bit of a weird contract. 4 years for a running back. I'd rather a 2 or maybe even a 3, but 4 is just a lot. He definitely won't be at the same level that he's at right now in 4 years. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I think Frank Reich will have some things kind of put together here. It's another year in his system, and this will sort of be a reckoning for him, I feel like, with how this rookie quarterback pans out. Because this is going to be his guy. This isn't going to be a veteran they panic and bring in to run Frank Reich's offense, right? This is going to be a guy that he has his pick of the litter at number 1, and this is going to be his quarterback. So I think we could see that go one of 2 ways for him, and it could be to either extreme, really. So that's going to be really interesting to see. At number 1, if you guys are the Panthers, who's your QB1 in this class? Who's your – okay, they moved up to number 1. It should be for this guy. What's your thoughts, Nick, on the quarterback class?
So obviously it's between Bryce and CJ, and there's so many there's no surefire pick, that you go with. It's like that situation where you have two guys that might be the better one, right? With the Carson Wentz situation, who's the better? So here we go, right? Bryce as CJ. I think that on draft night, it's going to be a huge surprise either way. I don't think it's going to be like, oh yeah, CJ Stroud. It's going to be like, oh shit, and go Bryce Young. Bryce Young. Oh wow, and go see. So I'm very surprised that there's not a lot of no, what I meant to say is I'm surprised that they did this and went all the way up to 1 to make this move. But Bryce Young is definitely the best passer in this draft. It'll be surprising if they go with a 5'10" guy, but he's just such a precision guy, and I think that they're going to go with Bryce Young just because they need that that solidifying quarterback with a really good arm with some new weapons, and I think that Bryce Young is the move.
Yeah, and what he's able to do off script can really make up for a lot of deficiencies on the offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
When he can put your defense into a scramble drill the way he can make your offense just that much more dynamic. And that's one of the best qualities for him as well, as accurate as he is, his ability to, even if it's not getting all the way outside of the pocket, just his maneuverability up through the pocket, and getting to his spot and even throwing off platform inside the pocket. That's probably the skill set that sets him apart from the rest of this class. Kev, who's your guy?
Oh, I tell you, for me, it's got to be Will Levis out of Kentucky. Big arm, questionable footwork, puts mayonnaise in his coffee, but I don't care. I'm going Will Levis.
Oh, shit.
Okay, now that we're, if all the Panthers fans have taken my advice, now that we can talk seriously for a second, it's CJ Stroud for me. And in all fairness, I have been calling for CJ Stroud to be the new quarterback in Indianapolis since about week 7 of last season, when some unfortunate Colts fans were still brave enough to think that 3-4-1 team, or whatever it was, week 8, that team was going to be able to go somewhere. And Stroud did struggle. I know games that stick out are like the Northwestern game. He did not have a perfect season by any means, but he played pretty well in the playoffs. And I think for my money, I'd be going with Stroud, but I really hope that's not where the Panthers go. And I'm doing a little bit of a spoiler alert for whenever we end up talking about the AFC South. But yeah, I think it's CJ. I really hope that they just go with Bryce Young. But it's rare that you see it. We might just be in a can't miss situation, right? So we're so used to, there's got to be a Ryan Leaf to your Peyton Manning. Maybe it's as simple as, both of these guys are going to be great quarterbacks when we look back on it. So give me Stroud though, if you have to.
Yeah, I think ultimately I'm with you there with Stroud. I do really like Bryce. Levis also eats the whole banana peel. I don't know if you guys have seen that too.
It's a character flaw.
Yeah.
It sounds like a skill issue to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it does not sound like an NFL ready diet.
Like to see his wonder lick after that. Jeez.
Yeah. But I like Stroud too. The Georgia tape was fucking insane. And he did have his ups and downs. And there's the Ohio State quarterbacks trope. It's there's that. It's tough to pull the trigger there sometimes, but you don't see the same type of things that you saw with the Justin Fields. I mean, at the NFL level, Fields obviously a dynamic athlete, but he has not been an efficient thrower of the football. He's not been particularly accurate. He has not been particularly poised in the pocket. He bails from a lot of clean pockets. It's just what it is. So if he gets some offensive line help, gets more clean pockets, maybe that'll curve off a little bit. But the offensive line was like middle of the pack. CJ Stroud, however, is one of the more dialed in, accurate passers in this draft with prototypical size to see over the offensive line. And I think for that reason, he might be the most NFL ready, just from a totality of frame, skill set, and he's played some big boy football in the Big Ten against some great competition a couple years as a starter. But it's really splitting hairs between him and Bryce. I think Bryce gives you a lot more juice when things break down. So if there's some things you need to make up for or cover up on the offensive side of the football, he's probably your guy. But we've seen Stroud do that at a high level as well. And it is interesting to see them trade all the way up to number one, because it almost feels safer when there is this kind of, first tier of guys. And there's also, you've got a former quarterback at Frank Reich. Maybe you feel inclined to go with a project. So maybe it feels safer to stick and pick and see who falls to you, honestly. And now, this could all be smoke and mirrors, but maybe they're flirting with even trading back again, which is nuts. We'll see. But I like going Stroud. I just hope they don't. Well, I guess I don't care what the Panthers do. But for the sake of that fan base and their future there, you gotta hope they don't panic and just go with one of those two guys, right? I think we're all kind of in agreement. Those are 1A, 1B, right?
Yeah. I think
So say all you want about throw velocity, say all you want about vertical, but I think those are the two best quarterbacks in this draft. And you might have a higher ceiling with a guy like Anthony Richardson if he really, really figures out the footwork, if he really, really figures out his pocket presence, because that kid can spin it, and he's the most dynamic athlete for sure. But I think it's one of those two guys. Let's go to this. I mean, this might be the quickest one in the division, because not only is this team really on its way out as far as the aging talent. I mean, you saw the run it back guys finally move on. You saw Cameron Brate not get cut. You saw Shaq Mason get traded back away for a day 3 pick, just to clear some cap there. They did retain Jamel Dean, which I think was a good move. They've still got one of the better secondaries in the NFL with Antoine Winfield, and then they've got Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean. Carlton Davis, one of the best press corners in football. Jamel Dean been phenomenal along the boundary in any type of cover 3 stuff when the sideline's really his friend. And he was probably getting some pretty high offers. Stayed in Tampa for 4 years, 52. And they also watched Sean Murphy Bunting walk.
Go to Tennessee, right?
Offseason, Tennessee. Yeah, we don't have the details on that deal yet. Sounds like a 1 year, but we don't have the money. But I think you've got to keep one of those guys. They were fortunate enough to draft really well in the secondary over this Brady era. And so to see both of those guys walk in the same offseason would have been pretty tough to bear, I think.
Yeah.
But not only is their talent starting to age out, is their talent starting to dwindle, they're also in a precarious cap situation, and they're also only picking at 19. They've got 19, 52, and 80, and then 6 day 3 picks on the back end there. So it's probably something of a best player available situation for them regardless. They've got the Bake Show in town. So he's here. It's, again, this is a division that's so wide open. We've talked at length about all of these teams, but none of them really strike me as, serious playoff contenders. But at least one of them's, I don't think more than one of them's going to make it. But at least one of them's going to be in the mix. And of course anything can happen from there, but I wouldn't even count the Bucs out from winning this division necessarily. That's the crazy part. It seems like they're really on their last leg. But if you look at the roster here and you figure they're at pick 19, they're probably sticking and picking and going BPA. Nick, what position do you feel like for value at 19, weighted against need for them, would be the best way to go, if you're in that seat?
Yeah, it's really tough because, you sign Baker and it's like now we don't have an issue anymore at quarterback, I suppose. So the pick that I've seen floating around a little bit for the Bucks has been Nolan Smith, Georgia edge rusher. I think that would be a pretty move. I mean, I saw Levante David. Obviously, I was expecting him to go someplace else, but he's so loyal that I guess he just wants to end his career with the Bucks. But I think that if they select Nolan Smith or go with some other edge guy, he can really be molded into what Levante is or was as a Hall of Fame type linebacker because he's still there. He can still help him out with everything that he needs. And you go into a situation where you're a rookie, but you got a veteran that's been there. He's seen it all and he's been there his entire career. He knows exactly what the system's about. So I think that it's an interesting thing because in the NFL you can also go someplace like with an offensive skill position, but are there guys that can considerably do the same exact thing? No. So I think that to go with somebody like Nolan Smith out of a big school like Georgia, obviously just won the national championship. He's got winning experience. He's got a lot of big game experience. I think going with somebody like that and then molding him and getting Levante David to mold him and try to mentor him as much as possible before he retires and kind of becoming the next Levante potentially would be such a cool thing for Tampa.
Yeah, I like that fit a ton. And I think Nolan Smith is sort of that, and this is a lofty comparison to make, so don't take it as all pro caliber. Think of it as more as a skill set thing. I think Nolan Smith is sort of that Micah Parsons ilk, where he's got that tweener size, but he's also got that tweener skill set where he's got serious pass rush chops. Whether that's off the edge at a 7 tech, but he's got the speed, 4.39 at the combine. He's got plenty of speed to play off ball. So you think about a potential future of Devin White and Nolan Smith off ball, especially the way Todd Bowles likes to blitz his inside linebackers. If you see him playing inside, I think he could still be utilized very, very efficiently and very effectively in that scheme. If he's able to rush the passer often, but also drop into coverage, whether that's off the edge or at an off-ball linebacker, I think you could do either with him. You saw Dan Quinn say, "Okay, who's hurt this week? All right, Micah, play there." And fill the hole for us. So I think he could be a very similar player, if he's utilized correctly. And you're right. I mean, Levante David, who they brought back on a 1-year, $7 million deal, would be an excellent mentor for a guy like that, as well as Devin White, who at this point is more veteran than it feels like. He still seems like such a young guy, but he's been around for a while here now. And you're right, comes from a winning culture. And the skeleton of a winner is still there in Tampa, right? I think there's a lot of pride in that locker room still for sure. And, any of these teams could be a good draft away from running away with the division. So I like that fit a lot with Nolan Smith there. And any type of front seven player, I think would be a pretty good bet for Tampa. But when you think about at 19, who might be there, versus the value he might provide, I think Nolan Smith would be a great fit. Moment of truth in the NFC South. Who do we have as our 2023 division winner? Nick, I'll start with you. Kev, you'll go next.
Okay, so obviously we were saying Saints earlier on the show, and then I kind of just backtracked on what I was just thinking about and what I was talking about, and it's like, who's got the best receiver in this division? I mean, is Mike Evans still there? I think he is. Do they still got Chris Godwin? I think they do.
Do they have
two
receivers in there?
Yeah, I think that the whole Baker, like, I'm not gonna be the next Tom Brady. I'm gonna be me. Like, no shit, you're not gonna be the next Tom Brady. Yeah, Mayfield. Like, I don't know what he's talking about, but like, yeah, like I think that it's gotta be like such a. But he played pretty well in Los Angeles. Those few games that he played, I think he's still got a lot to prove to himself, more than anybody else. Himself. He's a number 1 overall pick in 2018. That's only 5 years ago. There's guys that were in the same draft class that are doing really, really well for themselves. And I think that he could still become a valuable part of his, franchise and team. And I think that as long as he gets the ball to the guys that he needs to, makes good connections with Chris and Mike, and you hopefully draft an edge, like I said, then you got a really good defense. Todd Bowles knows what the hell he's doing. This team is going to be better than people think it is. And you still have so much not controversy, but like the unknown with Carolina. You have unknown with New Orleans. So hard to talk about Atlanta being a potential, division winner with what they have going on with the quarterback situation. So at the end of the day, you got that winning culture for the last few years. You still got some studs on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball who've been playing together. They know how to win. So I got Tampa winning like 8 or 9 games and coming out.
I like it. Yeah, I think all our winners are like an 8 or 9 win prediction, but it's a lot of it is going to be the interdivision matchups, right? That's going to decide a lot of this because I think we'll see similar records from these teams, frankly, out of division. Kev, who you got?
Real quick, I'm going to throw in one thing because I was on mute as we were wrapping up, and since we were still just talking about the Bucks, edge rusher Miles Murphy. Just wanted to throw that in there in case Nolan Smith is not available. That's another fit, I think, for all of the reasons that you guys have already said about Nolan Smith.
Yeah, he's starting to slide down boards too, for sure.
He's a potential alternate there, but I'm going to go back to what Nick had stated previously and what we kind of talked about ahead of the show. For me, it's still the Saints to win this division. And it's only because, or mainly because, there's 2 things for me. I think they have enough of their defense intact. I think they're going to have one of the better defenses in the division, and then Derek Carr. I have faith. I understand it's a gamble. We're betting on Derek Carr to do something in New Orleans that he hadn't necessarily done in Oakland or Las Vegas, but I think he's got the tools around him, and so give me the Saints as it stands right now.
Cool. So this is fun. We're all going to have a different one. I like Atlanta.
Wow.
I really like Atlanta. I think they figure it out this year. Another kind of sneaky signing is Mac Hollins at receiver. Another just big body out there who's been great over the middle. He ran, I think he was in like the top 3% of how often he ran routes over the middle. He was constantly running backside digs in Vegas with Derek Carr when they were dealing with some injuries. And that's just another big body out there. And like I said, I just think on the offensive side, with the pieces they brought in, I think you're going to see a lot of big personnel. I think you're going to see 12, 13 personnel. I think you're going to see hard-nosed, gritty football on the offensive side. And if it's Desmond Ridder under center, I think you're going to see plenty of designed quarterback runs. I think you're going to see plenty of Tyler Algier in running power to that right side of the line we talked about. I think you're going to see Kyle Pitts unleashed a little bit. Drake London, another year of refining his route running. He's got the raw talent to really make some noise. Cordell Patterson, obviously a dynamic weapon and a great special teamer. And then the splash moves on the defensive side of the ball, I think, are great. And Onyemata, who they poached from the Saints, is going to put together a really strong front with a guy like Grady Jarrett, Lorenzo Carter coming back at edge, who's fine. We'll see what they figure out at linebacker and so on. But I also think they have one of the best groups in the secondary. And if they do, like Nick mentioned, go with a guy like JPJ, Joey Porter, or Christian Gonzalez up top, or Devin Witherspoon, who was lights out in man in college. I think they could really put some pressure on offenses with the coverage they have on the back end. I think they could get pretty creative with sending extra blitzers and things like that. And this could be again, Arthur Smith kind of has his guys in place by this point. So whether or not they figure something else out at quarterback, and this is a place Will Levis could fall to these guys depending on how their temperature on Ritter. Anthony Richardson could fall to these guys, and that only kind of furthers my, hey, they're going to be able to run the ball down your throat, proposition, because I mean that was the 4.43 in the 40, 42-inch vertical. I mean that's going to be, and he's huge. That's another just huge person to put on the offensive side of the ball if it's a guy like him. So I like Atlanta. It's again, this is sort of a shot in the dark for all of us, but those are the reasons I see coming to fruition for them. So that's interesting. I think we may have a little bit more, a few more common opinions in the AFC South once we get to predictions, but that's another one that's pretty wide open, right?
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Well, let's talk about it. AFC South. I'll kick off favorite free agent signing because this was not an interesting division for free agent signings. The Jags spent all their money last year. The Texans keep giving one-year deals to old guys who don't make any sense. The Colts didn't do a ton yet.
He says.
Kev knows about it. We might see some more action. Ballard's, his feet are up. He's just waiting to see what happens. And the Titans are sort of cap strapped as well. We've heard murmurs of a Derrick Henry trade. We don't even know necessarily what their offense is going to look like. So there's plenty more dominoes to fall in this division as well. We haven't seen the big splash free agent signings, but something I like that is more attributed to fit is Jimmy Ward coming over to the Texans with D'Amico Ryans, and I just think he's going to ease the install of that defensive scheme for D'Amico and for the rest of that defensive unit. He's a guy who he played plenty of slot for the 49ers last year when Emmanuel Mosley went down. He's obviously versed in split safety looks, and he can play safety for you next to a Jalen Petrie on the back end. And they still have Desmond King, who, of course, can play some slot. We'll see what they do with him. But I think, and D'Amico Ryans, too, having that familiarity with him, I think, is going to be a huge deal. Jimmy Ward is, I think, 33, but it's a 2-year, $13 million deal. And like I said, I think he's just sort of going to be that bridge for D'Amico Ryans on the field to sort of help that install go smoothly and keep everybody on the same page. So Jimmy Ward's my favorite free agent signing going to Houston. Nick, who you got?
I would definitely say I'd have to agree. I think that I would love to go with somebody else. It's just that there's really not been much going on.
There's not a ton going on. Yeah.
As a Bills fan, Motor Singletary, yeah, good job, guys. You guys got, I'm not like that's not something that's like of any substance. They still got Damian Pierce as their main guy. So that's not a thing. So yeah, I was talking about if like Poyer left the Bills, I was kind of looking at Jimmy Ward as a potential fit there. Obviously, Poyer resigns, and then you see Ward go to Houston. It's just such a good fit. D'Amico Ryans, starting this thing, he wants to go back to like where his roots are from, and then he gets his guy from San Fran. That's so smart. I mean, that's just it's a home run for them. I mean, he's been around winning culture for the longest time, and now when you're you're still a really, really prevalent safety in this league, and you can help this new, this. Obviously, they're going for defense first, and then they're going to try to get a franchise quarterback. That's a pretty good. I like that. I really do. I think that works in this league, and I think that D'Amico Ryans is going to do a really good job with Jimmy Ward as he's been already doing, and then kind of molding the rest of the defense around him. I think that's the move. I think that's the thing that they should have done, and that's the thing they did. So the other teams, Jags, obviously really good. won the division unexpectedly. They're going to get Calvin Ridley back. It's not really a free agent signing by any means, but it's kind of, at this point. And then you got guys like the Titans. Like, I don't know, maybe they'll trade Derrick Henry to the Eagles on draft night. I don't know. That might happen.
That's never, DeMarco Murray. We've seen that stuff in the past. Hey, maybe that's a big Eagles move, right?
Yeah.
But Jay Ajayi, I could go on. No, I'm
I love Jay Ajayi. Yeah.
But yeah,
in that division, other than Jimmy Ward, there really hasn't been much of substance that's happened. So it's kind of like the only move you can really talk about.
Yeah, the Texans were high volume, but it was Robert Woods on a 2-year deal, MJ Stewart again for more than the veteran minimum for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Case Keenum, Hassan Ridgeway came over from San Fran, which is cool. Chase Winovich. Dalton Schultz, Devin Singletary you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the other? Sheldon Rankins
Schultz,
came over.
I kind of wanted to see go to Chicago, but I guess that didn't happen.
So just a smattering of other signings from Houston, but I think Jimmy Ward was the clear cut one that just makes a ton of sense. So, Kev, I know where you're going, but tell us about what you got for your favorite addition. To the
Well, I will just say that the Houston Texans roster looks like what would happen if you started an expansion in Madden and you had to do a draft, like an NBA style expansion draft. That's kind of what this roster is looking like right now.
Yeah,
a bunch of veteran minimum contracts get reloaded for next year.
That's the way to go.
Yeah,
another year of that. Yeah,
Calvin Ridley also gets my honorable mention because this was a year old. Free agent signing, but that's the biggest addition in this division right now. But to play the game as it was intended, Nick made a good point when he said Jimmy Ward was a home run of a signing. The signing I'm about to praise was more of a sacrifice fly to left field when there's a runner on third and the game is tied. And that is the Colts signing Matt Gay to a guaranteed contract, partially guaranteed contract. Some of my Colts brethren are up in arms over this. They cannot cope with it. They cannot just come to grips with it at all. But my thing is, any Colts fan can tell you, honestly, we'd have a hard time counting for you if you asked, over the last 4 years, Colts fan, how many games has your kicking or your kicker lost for you? It would be hard to keep track of. So I understand it's not as sexy, it's attractive addition, but it is a fundamental need for this team. This team hasn't had a good kicking game since before Adam Vinatieri just went on his 3-year retirement tour and Pat McAfee was still punting. So special teams are very important. And, just this season alone, that Colts team could have flirted with 500 if they had just made field goals. So despite how bad they were. So I think it was a very a simple, easy, but had to be done move. So good job, Colts. You get my participation trophy for the offseason.
Yeah, very, very deliberate move too. Going out early in free agency. I follow a lot of Colts guys on Twitter with some buddies I've made doing stuff like this. And that was one of the first pieces of news to break. And it was like, oh, we got something. And then everyone was like, okay. All right. 4 years, $22.5 million for Matt Gay. But he solves an issue, right? And that's what you go to free agency for. You want to go out and fill a need with a known quantity. So a quality kicker on what seems like a pretty lucrative deal. But that it's a need, and as well as anybody that the Colts kicking has been an issue over the past several seasons. So yeah, I like that one as well. But that goes to show you how few sexy moves there were in this division. So let's jump to your Colts first, and we'll talk about a few other additions of theirs. Another one of D'Amico Ryans' guys comes over to Indy here in Samson Ebukam. As soon as D'Amico got hired, I was like, okay, who's going to break the Samson Ebukam to Houston news? How long is that going to take? But he goes to Indy, and suddenly that's a pretty interesting edge rotation. I think, Ebukam was very much a rotational guy in San Francisco. Gets 3 years, 27 mil, if I'm not mistaken, to come over to Indy. Joined Kwity Paye, joined Dayo Odeyingbo. Yannick
Tyquan Lewis
Ngakoue.
just got brought back. We're hoping for something out of him, but that's
Yannick Ngakoue is unlikely to leave Gus Bradley's side. Is my guess. We'll see what happens there. But suddenly that's a relatively interesting edge rotation, and I think fills a need for them. You want fresh legs out there, but yeah, outside of that, they did re-sign EJ Speed, which we talked about a couple weeks back on our Colts mock off season, and wound up letting. Yeah, there you go. Wound up letting. We were close on the money too. Wound up letting Okereke walk. He got that big Devondre Campbell deal. $10 million a year to join Wake Martindale's Giants. But outside of that, it's you talked about Tyquan Lewis. So they re-signed Ashton Doolin. No Paris Campbell yet, though.
Paris Campbell is joining Bobby Okereke in New York with the Giants. He signed a 1-year, $3 million deal.
Which is unbelievable.
So it wasn't about the money, was it?
It wasn't about the money, because you saw Doolin get 3.6.
Might have had something to do with Paris Campbell being just great this year at getting separation, and yet only managing to catch 60-something passes. So
and he doesn't know he's going to be throwing over there, right?
Exactly. If you're going to take a prove it deal, you'd like to at least have a quarterback that can help you prove it.
And if there's one thing I learned from my Vikings playoff game, Daniel Jones can hit a wide open crosser. So if Paris Campbell gets wide open on mesh, he feels like he's going to get the ball.
I hope any quarterback could do that, though.
Oh, I know. I know, but
don't watch any of the Colts tape from last year, Nick.
Daniel Jones is giving Ed Donatell 10% of that contract.
Yeah.
But so that was one thing that stuck out to me as well, was not retaining Paris Campbell. If it was really, all in the front office to do so, I think they probably would have made that happen. But you're right. I think the situation is one that was attractive for him. Kev, I'm gonna let you roll with how you feel about the Colts sitting at 4 right now, and what your ideal, realistic scenario is. Let's say nobody fumbles ahead of you. Let's say the Panthers go Stroud or Young. Let's say the other of those goes in at 2 or 3. I don't know that we'll necessarily put you in a spot where Richardson also goes at 3. But say you're looking at Richardson or Levis there. Who's your preference of those two if you've got to take a QB at 4?
It's tough.
Let me just say something before Kev goes. Let me just say something. Kev has negative bias. He thinks that like if there was Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley next to other, he wanted the Colts guy or whatever to go get a guy, he would go with the wrong guy. So he thinks that they're gonna go with the wrong pick. That's all I'm saying. He's not gonna make him pick a good guy here.
He can tell I'm about to jam Levis right here. I'm about to just go on a 10-minute why Will Levis is the best.
He's getting reverse psychology ever.
Reverse psychology. That's a good point. Well, since Nick called me out, I guess I'll answer honestly. If I had to pick, and this one is a tough one, I'll tell you what I tried to do the first time on PFF when I did this mock. I tried to trade down because I'm so dissatisfied with the option of either Richardson or Levis at 4 that I couldn't stomach it. PFF gave me an F on that so I said, fine, I will take a quarterback at 4 since that's the only way I can play this apparently. And I went with Richardson, and I posted that on Twitter, and immediately people were like, why hate your first round pick. The rest of it looks good though. So I don't know what I could do in this situation. Honestly, at this point, I'm rooting for the Panthers or somebody to really be high on either Levis or Richardson so that the Colts can just stumble their way into a lucky break. But I think both of these guys are a project. Give me Richardson. Maybe this is some of my own bias just because I dealt with Carson Wentz as a Colts quarterback, but the Carson Wentz comps, not just the ones that I've heard, but the ones that I can see with my eyes, with the not great footwork and just trusting you talk about a guy who does have a howitzer on his shoulder, but that doesn't matter if you're going to throw off your back foot into triple coverage,
Yeah.
basically with your eyes closed. So there are situations like those that scare me, I guess, more. I guess Richardson does some of that too, but I guess just give me Richardson.
Yeah, Levis has a gun, but I think he's still working with the iron sights. I don't know if he's I don't know if he's got it
Yes.
zeroed in.
I'm
But
gonna
yeah,
take that one. I gotta borrow that sometime.
I'm probably with you there if it's between those two, right? But you've done plenty of Colts mocks. They've got a couple more top 100 picks. So you get your quarterback at 4. The fan base is polarized, but now you get to 35. What's your top position in need with that high second round pick? We just saw Gilmore walk. Kenny Moore still on the roster. Isaiah Rodgers still on the roster. Is it cornerback? Or are you leaning more towards one of those holes on the offensive line at left tackle or right guard?
So what I did, so I'm leaning more towards the offensive line. I got lucky in my last mock, and DeWandre the Giant was available from Ohio State, so I was able to snag him at 35. I'll be so happy if that actually plays out. I really don't think he'll be sitting there at 35.
Yeah.
What I decided to do in my mocks was I went O-line in the second round, and then I actually went back to back. I went corners in the third and fourth because I really like, forgive me, I'm going to forget 2/3 of this name, but LaDainian Tomlinson's nephew, the corner out of
Previous
TCU.
Hodges.
Yeah, who's
Yep.
I think projecting around a third or fourth round pick right now. I was able in my mock to grab. Drawing a blank on who I grabbed in the third round, but then I was able to swing back and get Tomlinson in the fourth because I do think Kenny. One of these corners is, I believe it's Kenny, that's gonna probably, I imagine, be traded. There are a couple more. Guys here on contract that I'm honestly surprised haven't been traded. Like I expected Ryan Kelly to have been traded already or cut already. So
Mm-hmm.
I do expect the Colts to need some of that cornerback depth. So honestly, if they have a second round corner that they love, I would then maybe think about doubling down on the offensive line in rounds 3 or 4. To me, this was the highest paid offensive line in football last year, and it had 2 massive gaping holes, and you've got to fill at least one of those with your first three round picks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you there. One guy I really like for the Colts, quick before we jump to the Titans, is Steve Avila out of TCU, guard center type. But he might be one of the best pass protectors in the draft right now. Really, really solid at guard. So that might be like an immediate stopgap. Just plug a hole and move on and see what you can figure out later. I do really like Isaiah Rodgers actually at corner. So maybe that's not quite, you're probably still looking for a CB1 on the boundary, but I don't know if it's as desperate as it might seem from the outside looking in when you see Gilmore move on. And yeah, I mean, Travius Hodges-Tomlinson might be a great replacement for a guy like Kenny Moore in the slot. So I like that thought process there. Let's jump to Tennessee. We have no idea where this roster is going. They, again, last year, they sort of finally fell off, but it was just one of those teams where it was just like they're always hanging around. It's a culture thing with Mike Vrabel's guys. So it's tough to picture them like tearing it down. You know what I mean? Like when I heard about the Derrick Henry trade rumors, I was like, whoa. With any other team, you'd probably assume that they'd have moved on from Tannehill by now. But I feel like they still feel like they can make some noise. But they're sitting at pick 11 here. And, let's, for the purposes of this exercise, say everything else stays the same. Roster-wise, there's nothing crazy with a Henry trade. There's nothing crazy with a Tannehill trade. where do you think you'd want to go with pick 11? They did cut Taylor Lewan, maybe offensive line, but the defense is kind of a mess too. What are your thoughts there?
The problem is everything went downhill when they traded AJ Brown. Like that was it. It was like, you know what I mean? It was like in the moment, I was like, ooh, like, okay, they're trading AJ Brown, but hopefully they're getting a big hole, which I guess they did, but it's like, it was so obvious that right away it was like Tennessee, like what happened to that? Like, not a good move.
Not
like,
everybody can trade Stephon Diggs and go draft Justin Jefferson with that pick.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen JSN, mocked to this team, but at the same time, like cool, right? But they, you want to like maybe you want to pair, Traylon Burks with JSN. And it's like that's a decent move. However, this is a team that needs to go defense so bad. So I would say Myles Murphy, right here, would be the move. And if not Myles Murphy, I would try to get, like a guy like Tyree Wilson, who's an edge defender. I would just try to go try to get some kind of defensive presence here because they've been so struggling in the last few seasons. And it's really been apparent that they're not up to tier to the other teams in this division. And it happened like bang right through the second half of the year. So yeah, I'm definitely going with either Myles Murphy or Tyree Wilson if they're not picked. JSN with potentially if both of those guys are off the board though. I don't know where my boy where Johnny went, but Kev, where are you going with the Titans?
I like that. I like what you said there. I tend to agree, Nick, with your breakdown as much as it's hard for a guy like me who tends to prefer offense to be like, yeah, let's get all these defensive, you got, like you said, JSN, one of the better receivers in the draft sitting right there, and it's a need. So it's so tempting, right, to just say I'm going to grab that. But I genuinely think that championships are won in the trenches. You can, and maybe it's a little bit different. This JSN is not a guy you can get in the middle of the draft or on a second day, but you can normally, maybe this is some outdated draft logic, but you have better chance of getting some kind of receiver that can make an impact for you later in the draft than you will of drafting someone in your trenches with a 4th round pick. You're gonna draft somebody there that's gonna really make an impact. So I don't know. I'm good with that, but also if those options aren't there and you're going with BPA and you've got a receiver there, it's certainly gonna fill a need. So. I don't know. I hope the Titans run out of time and that they don't get the pick in early enough. But don't tell James I said that, or I'm looking for a new co-host on Thursdays.
Yeah, and we just saw them lose Nate Davis in free agency. I don't know. It's tough because it's just a team with so many needs, right? But I think with Bud Dupree moving on, Harold Landry hopefully coming back healthy. Yeah, if a guy like Tyree Wilson's here at 11, I could see them going edge and sort of just leaning into a strength and saying, all right, well, if we're going to do anything, we're going to get after the passer. If we're going to do anything, we're going to sack Joe Burrow 9 times, even if he beats us, right? It's one of those things. So if they're able to make some noise, it's probably going to be stemming from a strong defense where they've got Jeffrey Simmons, where they've got Danico Autry. And maybe they can just really lean into that strength, like I mentioned, because it's going to be tough to fix this offensive line in one draft, in one offseason. It's going to be tough to get it back to a place where it's effective ahead of Derrick Henry. But I do also think they're desperate for weapons on the offensive side. So I could see a JSN at 11.
Me too.
We'll see how they feel about a Jordan Addison, something like that. Maybe, though, too, if one of these 4 quarterbacks starts to fall, maybe they're a team that's able to trade out to a team more desperate. And, maybe the board falls a little differently than we've seen, and there's one that falls a little bit there. But, yeah, I mean, they need so many bodies. They need so many different positions. It's a shit show in Tennessee right now, and I don't I don't see it getting too much better by the time we get to this season here. Let's jump to the Texans, who we spoke on
Ooh.
at length, but this is probably the most interesting slew of draft picks on day 1 and 2 here. And we talked about their additions. A lot of just guys, right? Just some low level starters, some high level backups that they've brought in at potentially too much money. But they've got, I think, the right guy at the helm in DeMeco Ryans. I've been really, really high on him for the last few seasons, ever since he started to get a little bit of head coaching buzz. And then, I loved keeping up with the 49ers. Last season, they ran a ton of cover 3 with DeMeco. They were able to do some really effective things out of Tampa 2 looks, mostly because they had a Fred Warner. So we'll see if DeMeco goes out and tries to get an athletic guy in the second level. But with pick 2 and 12, I think you're perfectly set up to get your franchise quarterback and then get DeMeco's favorite guy on the defense that's left at 12. And I think that's a spot where he's going to try to fill out that unit the best he can and sort of lean into that. They've got one of the best tackles in football that they just re-upped to reset the market with Laramie Tunsil. Kenyon Green showed some flashes. He was pick 13, I think, for him last season at guard. And they've got some fair starters across the offensive line outside of that. Dalton Schultz, correct? Which, we'll see how he does over there. And then Brandon Cooks has gone on the outside, so I suppose I could see them going with a receiver here as well. As much as 33 might be a little bit more of a sweet spot for that position. There's a lot of needs, but I feel like it's a much rosier picture when you think about the assets they have to fill those needs compared to a team we just talked about in Tennessee.
Yes.
So with the roster as it stands, and looking at those top 2 picks, I think with 2, you're assuming it's one of Stroud or Bryce. And that'll be a money pick for them. But when you drop down to 12, as you kind of survey the rest of the roster, Kev, where would you say is the number one need to go to complement that pick of a franchise quarterback up top?
Yeah, I agree with your idea that you mentioned earlier, where DeMeco may go with his favorite available defensive player here. And I jumped ahead a little bit to look at, the wide receiver stock there in the 30s. And what's his name? Is it Downs out of North Carolina? There's some guys right
Downs,
there around
70% contested catch rate at like 5'10".
Yeah, so yeah, not too bad. So there's still some talent there at receiver, I think, that you can get at 33. So I would agree. Now, I guess when I'm looking, I don't know, are we looking at somebody like Cansey out of Pittsburgh, who's right now, I think I've seen him, right around 12, 13 on
Be a
some big
DeMeco
boards.
guy, I think. Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. The way if DeMeco can get pressure with 4, then he's able to really put you in a difficult position with how he calls the back end. And you saw that be very effective in San Francisco. That's why he had such a deep rotation over there. So I think Cansey would be perfect guy for that defense. A guy who was able to generate pressure from the 3 technique. Not particularly great against the run, but I could see him really valuing Cansey highly there. Nick, what are your thoughts at 12 there?
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with both of you, even though it's a good move
We need it.
to go with DeMeco's guy, but he just got a guy. He got Jimmy Ward. He got his favorite guy, in my opinion. So when we were drafting our Chase, which I can't remember, I think it was 2020, we were always like, what I thought they should do is go O-line to protect Joe Burrow as much as possible. And when they went Jamar Chase, I was like, yeah, but you
Yeah, it was
can't,
the Sewell Chase thing. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, you can't throw to him if you have no time. And then they completely just like blew that thing out of the water and was like, yeah, screw you. And I was like, okay. You're like, it doesn't matter apparently when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So if you guys get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, why not pair him with a guy like Quentin Johnston? Because I mean, that would be such a great landing spot as a quarterback wide receiver duo right out of the gates. And I feel like, with a defensive guy in D'Amico Ryans already fine, and they're going to go mostly defense in this draft. I'm guaranteeing that they will. But why not try to get two really slam dunk type of receiver or quarterback receiver duo early on? So it's like they feel really good about their quarterback because it's one or two. They feel really good about Johnson because he's a stud and he's been projected to as like the number one wide receiver talent by many people. Then you feel really good about your offense, and you got a guy like you got Dameon Pierce and Singletary and Dalton Schultz. All of a sudden, the offense is kind of cooking. Laramie Tunsil on left tackle, and then you got a defensive-minded head coach, and you got already signed Jimmy Ward, and you got guys that are going to come to the team because of the D'Amico Ryans effect. And I feel like all of a sudden, this team is a lot more formidable than you thought it would be, and it's like a team that could win 7 to 8 games. And then in 2 seasons or next season, it's a team that can win 10 to 11. You're right back on pace in the playoff hunt. So I feel like this is the type of move that you make to get that quarterback wide receiver duo. And this is the type of move you make like right now. I think that's the move.
Yeah, I like your mentality there because, as you were saying that, I kind of thought too, D'Amico Ryans is probably a guy who can sort of raise your defensive floor as a play caller. So maybe he wants to, give the offense a little bit more weapons there, and feels like he can kind of buoy the defense with some more middling talent. So yeah, that makes plenty of sense to me as well. Let's jump to the Jags before we get into our division winner prediction here. So this is a team that was really quiet in free agency here. We talked about how much money they spent last season, the big Christian Kirk deal, of course. They did re-sign Roy Robertson Harris, 3 years, 30, after bringing him in last. So no big splashes for them really at all. And they're sitting at pick 24. Now they've got Zay Jones, Calvin Ridley, Evan Ingram got the franchise tag after having a bounce back year. And I think Trevor Lawrence is only going to take a step forward. They did lose Jawan Taylor to the Chiefs, who played pretty well at offensive tackle. So that is sort of my guess at 24. With this offensive tackle class, that seems like a relative sweet spot. And we could see the run of tackles go a lot sooner, but that could be a spot you could get a Broderick Jones, a DeWand Jones potentially. Maybe it's a guy they like more than others, and like a Cody Mock or something like that. But I feel like it's offensive tackle for them right now because they already feel they're giving T-Law another weapon in Ridley, who's coming off the suspension. They kept Evan Ingram in town, and I think they just try to replace that big loss in free agency right away, and then kind of figure out how they can piecemeal the defense thereafter in the draft. Lost a guy like Arden Key to free agency, who broke out a little bit last year. But those are my initial thoughts is offensive tackle at just about any cost with that first pick. Nick, what do you think about that Jags first rounder?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that if not O tackle or O line or O guard, O tackle, I think you try to go defense in this moment. Like they need some edge rushers, they need some corners to like kind of amplify the whole situation they have going on there. Obviously, it's pretty set other than the O line for the most part. So if they can't snag a guy like Darnell Wright out of Tennessee, who by the way is 6'5", 335.
Darnell's sick. Yeah, that's one I couldn't think of.
If you can't get a guy like that, You're definitely looking at guys like Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa. You're looking at guys like Nolan Smith, as we mentioned, out of Georgia, or even maybe Will McDonald IV, Iowa State. Those guys are all edge defenders. Those guys are all guys that can totally, just do great and just completely do wonders for that defensive front. So if you're not going offensive tackle because they've been picked and it's kind of like, you want to go best player available, tackle is not that guy, guard is not that guy, and you want to try to amplify the defense, totally go edge. But if not, you can find that offensive tackle, grab them.
Yeah, I think it's probably pass rush. Otherwise, I think it's a spot where you're going trenches. They did cut Shaquille Griffin, but I think it's mostly because they loved what they saw in the emergence of Tyson Campbell at cornerback. He played like top 15 corner last year per a lot of metrics, quietly. And Darius Williams, who once they put him back out on the boundary, he's got that nickel frame, but don't let it fool you. When he's out on the boundary and he's 5'9" and change, but when he's out, he's got long arms. When he's out on the boundary and he's able to use that sideline as a help for him on that outside, he was a lot more effective. So when he was moved back outside, they really caught a groove and felt comfortable moving off of Shaq Griffin. They might look for a slot guy a little bit later in the draft. Brought back Andrew Wingard at safety. Rayshawn Jenkins has been a huge playmaker on the back end for them. And I think the secondary they feel relatively comfortable with, and it's also a very deep secondary class. Not that it's not at edge, but I think when you're sitting at 24, you're probably getting the best value in the trenches for this particular roster. Kev, do you sort of agree with that sentiment?
I do. I think it's tackle, like you guys have said. I think that's, I'm looking over here around. There's Harrison out of Oklahoma. There's Jones, Broderick Jones out of Georgia. And I agree. I want to also add my train to the Rayshawn Jenkins hype train. That guy, phenomenal. I also want to throw a shout out to Foyesade Alokun, whose name I can't pronounce.
My boy,
he only had 128 solo tackles. So yeah, they're pretty solid, I think, in the middle, and I do like their defensive secondary. That was one of the things I learned late in the season when I graduated from a Colts beat writer to just covering the whole AFC South. Was, oh wow, all right, the Jags have a pretty decent defense, kind of underrated if anything. So for me, I do think it's tackle first, but I'm in agreement with you guys. If it's not there, then there's an edge, because there is a lot of talent. There's a lot of talented edge rushers right in that. At least right now where they're being ranked, it seems like there's going to be a good one there. So rather than reach on a tackle, if your guy's not there anymore, I would say, go ahead and get you an edge rusher.
Yeah, and it's like teetering there with that first tier of tackles. It's probably Harrison, Jones, and Wright for the most part. So if you see that run take place in like the late teens, it's sucks, but I think you're able to pivot and go with a really, if that many picks are taken up by tackle, there's probably some really nice edge pieces and defensive line pieces still sitting there at 24. So let's talk 2023 AFC South Division winner before we hop off here. Kev, I'll start with you. This is your division, man. Is this one for the shoe, or what's your take?
Oh, of course it is. Yeah, they're just a quarterback away for the 6th consecutive season. In all fairness to my beloved Colts, I do expect a significant bounce back, even if they end up trotting out Gardner Minshew as the starter for half the year. I think I've seen enough, not only with some of the I don't want to pass too much judgment on the Panthers right now. They could be sending out smoke screens. It is a bit concerning to send a king's ransom for the number 1 pick and then 2 days later say we might be interested in trading back down. But I don't know. There's a lot of smoke screens that get sent this time of year that there's really nothing. As a Colts fan and someone who follows Jim Irsay on Twitter, no one knows that better than me. These guys are out here just, trying to lie to you. So I do expect the Colts to be much better than they were last year. That's not saying much, but for me, it was always the Jags. was always the Jags for next year. I refuse to believe that what we saw this most recent season was a fluke, and so give me the Jags.
Nick, who you got?
Well, now I'm annoyed because I said going into this I was going to disagree with him, so now it's like hard to do. Now I'm going to disagree with that. Houston, I just said they're going to be contenders in 2 years. Like I can't. You know what? Fine. I got the Jags, but I'm going to make a hot take and say that the Titans will finish 4th.
Okay. Falling all the way down.
Otherwise, I'm just saying Jags and like, cool, shut up, Nick, get out of here. Like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm gonna like the Titans are gonna finish 4th, okay? And then I got Texans, Colts, Jags, because franchise quarterback, they already have experience now. Almost took down the Chiefs. Like, what are they gonna lose this division? No way.
Yeah, I've got to go Jags too, since I'm on the record here. But I do think that their biggest competition in this division is going to be Houston. I agree with Kev that the Colts will be much more competitive this season. And it's tough to say this when you've got Vrabel and Henry still on the roster. But with how many injuries they've dealt with over the past few seasons in Tennessee, I think the wheels come all the way off this season. Whether that's the result of them moving on from Henry, moving on from Tannehill, or anything like that. I think this is, all a full reset sort of for them. I think they do fall to the bottom of the division. But I think this is going to be a really strong foundational year for DeMeco Ryans and the Texans to build upon. And I think if it is Bryce or it's CJ Stroud, they're going to have some growing pains for sure. But I think they're going to surprise a lot of people with how the roster turns out. I'm really looking forward to their draft. They've got 5 top 100 picks. And I think they're going to use them well. So it's probably not going to be a roster that's there yet this season. But next season, I think we're really talking Texans, Jags, dogfight. And if the Colts figure out a quarterback, this might turn into a competitive division again.
The thing about the Titans is they need to swallow their pride.
Yes.
Sometimes it's better for you to take some steps back and then try to go forward again. Houston did it. They got rid of their guys. Now they have a chance a few years later to come back, Swallow your pride, guys. Like, it's not really working. What are you going to win, the Super Bowl? You're not even going to win your own division.
Oh, we got the 1 seed. You got to go through it to get through.
Who cares? Like, in the first round, man. Like,
you've got to go through it to get through it. So that's what we'll tell. And I don't see Vrabel on the hot seat either way necessarily.
He's a great coach.
So I think if he and ownership kind of come to that point where it's like, okay, let's move on from Henry when we can get some value for him. Let's move on from Tannehill before it might be sunk cost at this point, So I think the wheels come all the way off. I think the Jags run away with it this season. But I think the team that gives them a little bit of trouble is the Houston Texans. So that's my only additional take there. I think they sniff 500. I think the Colts sniff 500. But the Titans don't. And I think the Jags might win 11, 12 games and be a real competitor in the AFC. So that's all we've got for today. It was a fun show for sure. First show on the Bite Size Network. Many more to come. But in the meantime, you can check out plenty of our other shows. Kev is live talking hoops on Thursday nights, 9 Eastern.
That's right.
9 Eastern with our boy James, who we just dogged his Titans. I hope he doesn't watch the end here. But yeah, we'll tell him about it. Maybe we'll hit him in the Discord.
Follow us on Twitter in case I need a new co-host.
Yeah, but yeah, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, that whole shebang. And you can follow us all individually on Twitter. We're usually spouting off about our respective teams. Nick the Bills, my Vikings. We talked about Kev's Colts today, and we'll see We'll see which direction of divisions we talk about next week. South, we can maybe go north. We'll see how it goes. I just saw something today that, and I'm not surprised, but Vikings Twitter is by far the most negative fan base there is. I'll send you guys this graph, but it was 17% more negative than the next team. Yeah. Yeah. 38% of all Vikings related tweets are negative, according to whatever study this was that I just saw. But that'll be a fun show for sure. So we'll see how that one goes. Until then, guys, again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you to all who tuned in and commented and so on and so forth. And we'll get some shorts up to make this a little bit more digestible for you throughout the week. Thanks, guys. We'll sign off.
Thanks, guys.